Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony and watched the stars through the main screen. The ship moved quietly through space toward the Andorian sector, where two alien races were fighting over mining rights. Jake had done this kind of work for 20 years now, and he was tired of it. Every time humans tried to make peace between other species, they gave up more and more of what they believed in. Captain Lisa Parker walked up beside him and handed him a datapad. She was his second in command and one of the few people he trusted completely. Lisa had seen as much as he had, and her face showed the same weariness that Jake felt in his bones. The Thrakari are demanding full mining rights to the crystal fields, Lisa said quietly. They claim the Zephyrians are not using the resources properly, and that the Concordat should give them control. Jake looked at the data and frowned. The Thrakari were an insect-like species that valued efficiency above everything else. The Zephyrians were made of living crystal, and they needed those same fields to survive and reproduce. It was not really a dispute about mining rights. It was about whether one species had the right to destroy another for profit. What does the Concordat Council say? Jake asked, even though he already knew the answer. They want us to find a compromise that makes both sides happy, Lisa replied with disgust in her voice. They think we can somehow make genocide look reasonable if we use the right words. Dr. Marcus Webb joined them on the bridge carrying his research tablet. Marcus was their xenobiologist, and he spent most of his time studying alien cultures and behaviors. He looked upset about something, and Jake could see his hands shaking slightly. "Admiral, I need to show you something," Marcus said in a tight voice. "I have been analyzing the data from the disputed region, and I found some recordings that the Thrakari tried to hide." Jake nodded for him to continue. Marcus activated a holographic display that showed aerial footage of what looked like industrial facilities on several planets. At first glance, they seemed normal, but as Marcus zoomed in, the true horror became clear. Thousands of Zephyrians were trapped in metal cages barely large enough for their crystalline bodies. Mechanical devices were attached to each prisoner, and they were slowly draining the life energy from the crystal beings. The Zephyrians were conscious during the entire process, and their bodies grew dimmer and smaller as their essence was extracted. The Thrakari have been running these facilities for months, Marcus explained with anger building in his voice. They are not just mining the crystal fields. They are harvesting the Zephyrians themselves. Each facility processes about 500 beings per day. Lisa turned away from the display, but Jake forced himself to keep watching. He had seen terrible things during his career, but this level of cruelty was beyond anything he had encountered. The worst part was that the Thrakari were doing it efficiently and systematically, like it was just another industrial process. "How many facilities are there?" Jake asked. 17 that I can confirm," Marcus replied. "Probably more that are hidden. The Thrakari are treating the Zephyrians like livestock." Jake closed his eyes and tried to control his anger. This was exactly the kind of situation where humans were supposed to intervene, but the Concordat had rules about interfering in other species' internal affairs. Even when those affairs included genocide. "Take this evidence to the Concordat Council," Jake ordered. "Make sure every species sees exactly what is happening." 3 days later, Marcus returned from the council meeting looking defeated. He found Jake in his quarters staring out at the stars and trying to understand how the galaxy had become so broken. "They dismissed it," Marcus said without bothering to sit down. The Draconis representative said it was a cultural difference. The Aquarian delegate called it resource management. Even the Centauri, who usually support us, said we were being emotional about a biological process. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. He had spent decades trying to believe that the other species in the Concordat shared human values about life and dignity. Now he realized they saw the universe very differently than humans did. "What about the other Zephyrian colonies?" Jake asked. "The council voted to relocate them to protection zones," Marcus replied with bitter sarcasm. "They will be safe there while the Thrakari finish mining the disputed territories." Over the next week, Jake watched the Concordat implement their solution. The surviving Zephyrians were moved to small areas of space that the other species called sanctuaries. Jake called them reservations and prison camps. The Zephyrians who had once lived freely across dozens of worlds were now confined to a few rocky moons with barely enough crystal deposits to keep them alive. The Thrakari celebrated their victory and immediately began expanding their mining operations. They also started building more processing facilities, and Jake realized they intended to eventually harvest every Zephyrian in the galaxy. The other concordate species did not care as long as it happened slowly and quietly. The ceremony to sign the peace agreement took place on the neutral station orbiting Andoria Prime. Representatives from all 12 Concordat species gathered to celebrate another successful human mediation. Jake sat at the table and listened to speeches about compromise and understanding while trying not to think about the Zephyrians dying in Thrakari facilities. When his turn came to sign the document, Jake picked up the ceremonial pen and felt his hands begin to shake. Every signature he had ever put on a peace treaty felt like a betrayal now. He was not creating peace. He was legitimizing murder and calling it diplomacy. The Draconis representative smiled at him with sharp teeth and spoke in a voice like grinding metal. Humans are so good at finding solutions that work for everyone. Jake signed his name and set down the pen. As he looked around the table at the alien faces, he realized something important. None of these species respected humans for their diplomatic skills. They valued humans because humans were willing to make any compromise necessary to avoid conflict. They saw human mercy as weakness and human morality as something they could exploit. That night, Jake stood alone on the observation deck of the Harmony and watched the lights of the Thrakari fleet moving toward the former Zephyrian worlds. Tomorrow they would begin their harvest in earnest and the galaxy would pretend not to notice. The Concordat had achieved peace by agreeing that some species mattered more than others. For the first time in his career, Jake Morrison began to wonder what would happen if humans stopped being so reasonable. What would the galaxy look like if humans decided to act like the predators they had been, before they learned to hide their true nature behind diplomatic smiles and peaceful negotiations? Commander Alex Stone gripped the armrest of his command chair as his ship approached the first Zephyrian protection zone. 6 months had passed since the peace agreement, and reports from the zones had been disturbing. Officially, the Zephyrians were being protected and cared for by Concordat peacekeepers. Unofficially, no outside observers had been allowed to visit, and communication with the zones had been completely cut off. Alex commanded the humanitarian vessel UES Mercy, and his mission was supposed to be simple: deliver medical supplies and food to the relocated Zephyrians, then file a report confirming that everything was working properly. He suspected the mission would not be simple at all. Lieutenant Karen Hughes sat at the communications station trying to establish contact with the zone administrators. Karen was young, but she had good instincts, and Alex trusted her judgment. She had been sending standard greeting messages for 2 hours without receiving any response. Still no contact from the zone, Karen reported with frustration in her voice. I am picking up some automated signals, but nothing from actual people. The energy readings are strange too. Alex studied the scan results on his display. The protection zone was built around a small moon that had minimal crystal deposits. According to the files, it housed nearly 10,000 Zephyrians in comfortable facilities with full medical support. The energy signatures he was seeing did not match that description. Take us in closer, Alex ordered. I want to see these facilities with our own eyes. As the Mercy moved closer to the moon, the truth became visible through the main viewer. The protection zone was surrounded by a massive energy barrier that prevented anyone from leaving. Inside the barrier, Alex could see industrial structures that looked exactly like the processing facilities Dr. Webb had discovered months earlier. Oh God, Karen whispered as she enhanced the visual display. Alex, you need to see this. The enhanced images showed Zephyrians moving slowly between buildings like walking corpses. Their crystalline bodies were dim and cracked, and many of them appeared to be barely alive. Mechanical devices followed them everywhere and periodically attached to them to drain small amounts of life energy. Alex felt sick as he realized what was happening. The Concordat had not created protection zones. They had created death camps where the Zephyrians could be slowly harvested, while the galaxy pretended they were being cared for. It was genocide disguised as humanitarian aid. Get me a full scan of the facility, Alex ordered. I want to know exactly how many Zephyrians are down there and what condition they are in. The results were worse than he had feared. The zone held nearly 8,000 Zephyrians, but most of them were dying. The energy extraction process was designed to keep them alive as long as possible, while slowly draining their life force. The average survival time appeared to be about 18 months. Karen suddenly looked up from her station with alarm. Commander, we have ships incoming. It looks like a Concordat patrol fleet led by Draconis vessels. Alex watched the approaching ships and recognized the flagship of General Veltar, who had been present at the peace signing. The Draconis commander had made it clear that he viewed humans as useful, but ultimately inferior beings who existed only to serve Concordat interests. Incoming transmission, Karen announced. General Veltar appeared on the main screen with his reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile. His scales were dark red with black markings that indicated high military rank among his species. Behind him, Alex could see the bridge of a Draconis warship bristling with weapons. "Commander Stone," Veltar said in his grinding mechanical voice, "you are not authorized to be in this area. The protection zones are under Concordat security control and civilians are not permitted." Alex stood up from his command chair and looked directly at the Draconis general. "We have humanitarian supplies for the Zephyrian refugees. Our mission was approved by the Council. The refugees are being properly cared for," Veltar replied. "Your supplies are not needed. You will leave this system immediately. I want to inspect the facilities and confirm that the Zephyrians are receiving proper treatment," Alex said firmly. Veltar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Humans always think they know better than everyone else. The Zephyrians are exactly where they belong and they are being treated according to their nature. You will not interfere with Concordat operations." Alex felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "What operations are those, General?" The peace agreement said this was a protection zone, not an industrial facility. The Zephyrians require special processing to maintain their health in this environment, Veltar explained with obvious satisfaction. The procedures may look uncomfortable to human eyes, but they are necessary for refugee management. Before Alex could respond, Karen grabbed his arm and pointed to her console. She had been monitoring the communications traffic between the Draconis ships and she looked terrified. "Commander," she whispered, "I have been decoding their internal messages. They are not just doing this to the Zephyrians. There are facilities like this for every species that has been relocated by Concordat peacekeeping operations. Millions of beings are being processed this way." Alex stared at the data Karen was showing him. The Concordat had been systematically removing inconvenient populations from contested territories and placing them in processing centers where they could be slowly harvested for whatever resources their bodies contained. It was industrialized genocide on a scale that was hard to comprehend. "There is something else," Karen continued in a shaking voice. "I found classified files about humanity. The Council has been planning our eventual processing once our usefulness as mediators ends. They want to harvest human creativity and emotional capacity. They think our brains work differently than theirs and they want to study us." Alex felt something fundamental break inside him as he realized the truth. Humans had spent over a century trying to create peace and cooperation with species that viewed them as future livestock. Every compromise they had made and every principle they had abandoned had only convinced the other species that humans were weak and exploitable. Admiral Morrison's voice came through. The comm system, as the UES Harmony, dropped out of hyperspace near the protection zone. Jake had arrived with a full battle group after receiving Alex's initial reports about the facilities. "General Veltar," Morrison said over the open channel, "I am ordering you to allow our humanitarian mission to proceed. The Zephyrians have the right to medical assistance under Concordat law." Veltar turned to face Morrison's image with obvious contempt. "Admiral Morrison, your species has no authority here. The Draconis Empire is responsible for security in this sector and humans will obey our commands or face the consequences." Jake Morrison was quiet for a long moment and Alex could see something dangerous building in the older man's eyes. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was completely calm, but somehow more frightening than any shout would have been. "General, I am requesting safe passage for our medical teams. This is not a military operation and we are not threatening anyone. We just want to help dying refugees." "The refugees do not need your help," Veltar snarled. "They are serving their proper purpose in the natural order. Strong species like the Draconis survive and prosper, while weak species like the Zephyrians provide resources for their betters. Humans should learn this lesson before you share their fate." To emphasize his point, Veltar activated a communication link to the processing facility below. On the main screen, Alex and the crew of the Mercy watched in horror as Thrakari technicians brought a young Zephyrian to an extraction device. The child was barely half the size of an adult and their crystalline body flickered weakly. "Watch carefully, humans," Veltar said with satisfaction. "This is what happens to species that cannot defend themselves. The child will provide enough energy to power one of our ships for several days. Alex watched the Thrakari attach the extraction device to the child's body and begin the draining process. The young Zephyrian cried out in a sound like breaking glass as their light began to fade. Their body grew smaller and dimmer until finally the light went out completely, and they crumbled into dust. The silence on the bridge of the Mercy lasted for nearly a full minute. Alex could hear his crew breathing heavily, and he could feel the rage building in every human heart present. When Admiral Morrison finally spoke again, his voice was completely different. "All human ships will withdraw from concorded space immediately," Morrison said quietly. "We are returning to Earth for emergency consultations." Feltar laughed with genuine amusement. "Run away, little humans. This is what happens when weak species try to pretend they are equals. Remember what you have seen here, and perhaps you will be more cooperative in the future." As the human fleet began to move away from the protection zone, Alex heard Morrison's final transmission. It was only 2 words, but they seemed to freeze every alien crew member who heard them. "Remember this." President Nathan Cross stood at the podium in the Global Defense Council chamber and looked out at representatives from every human nation on Earth. The emergency session had been called after Admiral Morrison's fleet returned from concorded space with footage that changed everything humanity thought they knew about their alien allies. Nathan had been president for 6 years, and he had always believed that humans could find peaceful solutions to any conflict. The evidence Morrison brought back proved that some conflicts could not be solved with diplomacy because the other side viewed negotiation as weakness rather than strength. "We have lived a lie for over a century," Nathan began in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber. "We believed that other species shared our values about life and dignity. We thought that if we showed them our best nature, they would respond with their own. We were wrong." The main screen activated and showed footage from the Zephyrian processing facilities. Representatives who had never seen alien cruelty before gasped and turned away as the images revealed the systematic torture and murder of thousands of innocent beings. Nathan forced himself to watch every second of the recordings. "The Galactic Concordat is not a peaceful alliance," Nathan continued. "It is a system designed to allow strong species to exploit weak ones while maintaining the appearance of civilization. They kept us around because we were useful for legitimizing their crimes through diplomatic agreements." General Patricia Sullivan stepped forward from her position at the side of the chamber. Patricia commanded the Human Defense Forces, and she had been preparing for this day longer than anyone else in the room. Her uniform bore decorations from conflicts that most people had forgotten, but she remembered every battle humanity had ever fought. "Members of the Council," Patricia said in her clear military voice, "I need to share classified information about our true military capabilities. What I am about to tell you has been kept secret since first contact with alien species." Patricia activated a holographic display that showed technical specifications for human military technology. The representatives stared in amazement as they realized that everything they thought they knew about human defensive capabilities was completely wrong. "We have been pretending to be weaker than we actually are for 130 years, Patricia explained. "Our ships are not primarily designed for exploration and diplomacy. They are warships that have been deliberately modified to appear peaceful and defensive to alien observers." The display changed to show massive shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt and on the moons of Jupiter. Hundreds of vessels floated in the construction bays, and their designs were unlike anything the public had ever seen. "These ships were built for one purpose, and that purpose was war. We always knew this day might come," Patricia continued. "Humans are the only known species that wages war for abstract concepts like justice and revenge. Every other species fights only for territory or resources. They do not understand the concept of righteous anger." Captain Ryan Torres entered the chamber wearing the uniform of the Deep Space Fleet. Ryan had been stationed at the secret shipyards for 10 years, and his ship was one of the first to be activated for combat operations. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been waiting for permission to show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. "The UES Retribution is ready for launch," Ryan reported to Patricia. "All stealth systems are operational, and we have successfully tested the new weapon configurations. The aliens have never seen our real technology because we never wanted to frighten our allies." Nathan looked around the chamber and saw the same expression on every face. It was not excitement or bloodlust, but rather a grim determination to do what needed to be done. Humans had tried peace and cooperation for over a century, only to discover that their partners viewed them as future victims, rather than equals. Dr. Sophie. Chen stood up from her seat in the science section of the chamber. Sophie had been working on classified military projects while publicly serving as a civilian researcher. Her work had been hidden behind medical and exploration research, but its true purpose was to prepare humanity for the war that seemed inevitable. "We have removed all safety protocols from our weapon systems," Sophie announced. "The power limiters that prevented our technology from causing excessive damage have been disabled. Our weapons are now configured to maximize psychological impact on enemy forces rather than simply disable their ships." The chamber fell silent as representatives began to understand what they were really discussing. Humanity was not just preparing to defend itself against alien aggression. They were preparing to demonstrate that human mercy had always been a choice rather than a limitation. "What about the other species that opposed the genocide?" asked a representative from the African Federation. "Surely some of our allies will support us." Admiral Morrison activated another display that showed voting records from every Concordat Council session over the past 50 years. The data revealed a disturbing pattern of unanimous support for policies that prioritized resource extraction over the rights of weaker species. "There are no innocent parties in the Concordat," Morrison said grimly. "Even the species we considered most civilized have participated in or benefited from systematic oppression of others. They all knew what was happening in the processing facilities, and they all chose to allow it." Patricia returned to the podium and began outlining Operation Nightfall. The plan was not designed to destroy the Concordat through massive military strikes. Instead, it would demonstrate to every alien species that their continued existence depended entirely on human restraint. "We will not conquer them," Patricia explained. "We will break them psychologically by showing them exactly what we are capable of when we stop pretending to be something we are not. They have mistaken our civilization for weakness and our morality for stupidity. It is time they learned the difference." The first phase of the operation would target General Veltar and his fleet in the Draconis home system. The attack would not be designed to kill, but rather to capture and humiliate. The general who had ordered the execution of a Zephyrian child in front of human observers, Veltar, believes humans are weak because we value life, Ryan Torres said as he prepared to return to his ship. He is about to learn that humans are most dangerous when something they value has been threatened. "We are persistence hunters, and we do not forget injuries to our pack." Nathan looked around the chamber one final time before calling for the vote that would end humanity's participation in the Galactic Concordat. The decision was unanimous, and every representative understood that they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "For over a century, we have hidden our true nature because we wanted to be better than our ancestors," Nathan said as he signed the Declaration of Withdrawal. "We have learned that being better than someone else does not mean you have to be weaker than them. The galaxy will discover what humans are like when we stop apologizing for what we are." As the human fleets began moving toward their targets, Nathan received reports that alien intelligence services were finally paying attention to human military capabilities. Panic was spreading through Concordat space. A species that had dismissed humans as harmless mediators realized they had been living next to sleeping predators for over a century. The last message from Concordat space came from a Centauri diplomatic vessel. The captain was requesting an emergency meeting to discuss human concerns about recent events. Nathan deleted the message without responding because the time for discussion had ended. Operation Nightfall began with a single transmission broadcast on all frequencies throughout the galaxy. It was not a declaration of war or a list of demands. It was simply footage of the Zephyrian child being murdered, while alien officials watched with approval. The message that followed was equally simple. You wanted to see what humans do when mercy fails. Now you will learn what we do when mercy ends. Captain Danny Clark guided his stealth destroyer through the outer regions of Draconis space, completely undetected by alien sensors. The UES Phantom had been designed specifically for psychological warfare, and its crew had trained for years to operate behind enemy lines without being discovered. They were ghosts in the darkness, and their mission was to break the enemy's will to fight. Danny stood on the bridge watching Draconis supply convoys moving between their military bases. These ships carried food and equipment to the fleets that enforced Concordat policies throughout the galaxy. The convoys were heavily defended, because the Draconis assumed any attack would come from the front with overwhelming force like traditional military operations. They were wrong about how humans preferred to fight their wars. Target the next convoy, Danny ordered his weapons officer. Remember, we are not trying to destroy them. We want survivors who can spread stories about what happened here. Lieutenant Amy Foster commanded the boarding teams that would infiltrate the Draconis ships. Amy had been selected for this mission because she understood the psychological impact of human soldiers appearing where they were not supposed to exist. The Draconis believed their ships were impregnable fortresses, but humans had been studying alien technology for decades. The Phantom moved silently alongside a Draconis cargo vessel and extended docking tubes that cut through the alien hull without triggering any security systems. Amy led her team through the breach wearing armor that made them look like nightmares from Draconis mythology. The alien crew never had a chance to fight back because the humans struck simultaneously at every critical system on their ship. Within minutes, the Draconis found themselves trapped in their own vessel while human soldiers moved through the corridors like hunting predators. Amy found the ship's captain cowering in his quarters, and she could see the terror in his reptilian eyes. The Draconis had always considered themselves apex predators, but they had never encountered anything like human soldiers operating in perfect coordination. "Tell your people what you saw here," Amy said as she prepared to leave the ship. "Tell them that humans can appear anywhere we choose, and that your strongest defenses mean nothing to us. Tell them this was mercy compared to what comes next." Similar raids were happening throughout Draconis space as human teams demonstrated their ability to strike at will against targets that should have been impossible to reach. The psychological effect was devastating because the Draconis realized they had no defense against an enemy that could appear from nowhere. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster was leading a different kind of operation on the Thrakari homeworld. Her mission was to shut down the processing facilities where Zephyrians were being harvested, but she was not allowed to simply destroy the buildings. Instead, she had to disable them in ways that could never be repaired. Amy guided her ground team through the underground tunnels beneath the largest processing facility. Human intelligence had mapped every Thrakari installation over the decades, and they knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. The Thrakari guards never saw the humans coming because Amy's soldiers moved through their security systems like they did not exist. Years of pretending to be allies had given humans complete access to alien technology, and they had learned to use that knowledge as a weapon. "Plant the charges at the primary power couplings," Amy ordered her demolition specialist. "When these explode, the entire facility will shut down permanently, but it will look like a system failure rather than sabotage." The explosions were small and precise, but they severed connections that the Thrakari would never be able to repair. The processing facility would appear intact from the outside, but every system inside would be dead forever. It was surgical destruction that left the enemy wondering how their most secure installations could fail so completely. Admiral Morrison arrived at the first Zephyrian processing facility with a full battle group, but he did not immediately attack. Instead, his ships began broadcasting on all frequencies, and the message they sent was more terrifying than any weapon could have been. "This is Admiral Morrison of the Human Defense Forces," Jake announced to every ship and station in the system. "We have been watching and learning about each of you for over 100 years. We know your names, your families, your homeworlds, and your personal weaknesses. We know everything." The broadcast continued with detailed intelligence files about every Concordat leader and military commander. Humans revealed that they had been secretly recording every conversation, monitoring every communication, and tracking every movement made by their alien allies. The galaxy realized that human diplomatic missions had been intelligence-gathering operations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez led the science teams that began deploying humanity's ultimate psychological weapon. Elena had been collecting evidence of alien war crimes and genocide for decades while pretending to conduct routine research. Now she released all of that information simultaneously. Every species in the galaxy suddenly found their darkest secrets exposed for all to see. The careful propaganda that portrayed the Concordat as a peaceful alliance crumbled as evidence of systematic slavery, torture, and murder spread through every communication network. "The humans knew," whispered alien leaders as they realized the full scope of human intelligence capabilities. "They knew everything we did, and they said nothing. They were never our allies. They were studying us like laboratory specimens. The psychological impact was devastating because every species realized that human restraint had never been weakness. Humans had chosen to remain silent about alien crimes while secretly preparing for the day when silence would no longer be an option. General Veltar found himself trapped aboard his flagship as human. Boarding teams moved through the ship with impossible efficiency. The Draconis general had expected death or torture, but Admiral Morrison had something much worse planned for the alien who had murdered a child to demonstrate his power. "General," Morrison said as he entered Veltar's command center surrounded by human soldiers, "I want to show you something that will help you understand what happens next." Morrison activated a holographic display that showed detailed plans for the complete dismantling of Draconis civilization. The humans had identified every weakness in Draconis society, and they had developed methods to exploit each vulnerability without firing a single shot. "We are not going to destroy your species through military conquest," Morrison explained calmly. "We are going to remove everything that makes your society function. Your supply lines, your communication networks, your economic systems, and your political structure will all cease to exist." Veltar stared at the plans and realized they were not theoretical exercises. Human agents were already implementing each phase of the operation, and Draconis civilization was collapsing from within. The humans had turned their diplomatic access into a weapon of unprecedented sophistication. "You will live to watch it happen," Morrison continued. "Every day you will see another piece of your empire crumble, and you will know that it happened because you chose cruelty over mercy. You taught us that strength without compassion is the only language you understand." Morrison left, Veltar alive but completely broken, as the general realized that human revenge was not quick death, but rather the slow destruction of everything he had ever valued. The Draconis Empire would survive, but it would never again be powerful enough to threaten anyone. Similar operations were proceeding throughout. Concordate Space's humans demonstrated their ability to dismantle entire civilizations without traditional warfare. Species that had dismissed humans as weak mediators discovered that human intelligence and planning capabilities far exceeded anything they had imagined. The most terrifying aspect of the human campaign was its precision. Every strike was carefully calculated to cause maximum psychological damage, while leaving the target alive to spread fear among their own kind. Humans were not conquering the galaxy through brute force, but rather through the systematic application of terror. Within 6 months, the Galactic Concordate had ceased to exist, not because it was destroyed by human weapons, but because every member species was too frightened to continue cooperating with each other. They had learned that humans could reach them anywhere and that human patience had finally run out. The galaxy entered a new age, where the most feared phrase in any language was, "The humans are coming," because everyone knew that when humans finally stopped pretending to be peaceful, the results would be beyond anything anyone had ever imagined. Captain Ryan Torres stood on the observation deck of Monitoring Station Alpha 7 and watched the patrol ships of 6 different alien species maintaining careful distances from each other. The station was positioned at what had once been the heart of Concordate space, but now served as a neutral zone where former enemies tried to rebuild their shattered civilizations. 6 months had passed since Operation Nightfall ended, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality. The Galactic Concordate no longer existed because none of its former members trusted each other enough to cooperate. More importantly, they all understood that their continued existence depended entirely on maintaining human approval. Ryan reviewed the daily reports from his monitoring teams and noted that the Draconis had requested permission to establish a small trading post near their former military headquarters. The once proud empire now controlled less than a dozen star systems, and their requests for expansion had to be approved by human administrators. "Captain," Lieutenant Karen Hughes called from the communication station, "we have an incoming message from the Zephyrian recovery zones. Dr. Chen wants to report on their progress." Ryan activated the holographic display, and Dr. Sophie Chen appeared from her research facility orbiting the former Thrakari homeworld. Sophie had been working for months to help the surviving Zephyrians recover from their torture and rebuild their shattered communities. "The Zephyrians are making remarkable progress," Sophie reported with satisfaction in her voice. "Their population has stabilized and the younger ones are already beginning to reproduce. The crystal gardens we planted are providing enough energy for full recovery within another year. Ryan smiled as he thought about the contrast between human treatment of refugees and the way the Concordat had handled displaced populations. Where aliens had seen resources to be harvested, humans saw people who deserved dignity and support. What about their psychological recovery? Ryan asked, because he knew that healing physical damage was easier than repairing traumatized minds. They are learning to trust again, Sophie replied. It helps that they can see what happened to the species that hurt them. The Thrakari processing facilities have become museums where Zephyrians can remember their dead and witness human justice. The fate of the Thrakari had become a lesson for the entire galaxy about what happened when species chose cruelty over cooperation. Their homeworld was now a nature preserve managed by Zephyrian volunteers, while the surviving Thrakari lived in small agricultural colonies where they grew food for other species. President Nathan Cross appeared on another communication channel from his office on Earth. Nathan looked older than he had 6 months ago, but there was a calm satisfaction in his expression that had not been present during the dark days when humans were still pretending to be something they were not. Ryan, Nathan said in greeting, I need your assessment of galactic stability for my address to the Reformed Council next week. Ryan accessed his files and began reviewing the current status of former Concordat members. The picture was complex, but encouraging for anyone who valued justice over efficiency. The Draconis Empire has been reduced to 12 star systems and their military consists of patrol ships that could not threaten a cargo freighter, Ryan reported. General Veltar is still alive, but he spends his days tending a memorial garden for Zephyrian victims. The psychological conditioning appears to be permanent. Nathan nodded with approval because breaking Veltar's mind had been more satisfying than simply killing him would have been. The general, who had murdered a child to demonstrate his power, now devoted his life to honoring the memory of his victims. The other species have divided into smaller groups that watch each other carefully, Ryan continued. None of them are strong enough to threaten their neighbors, and they all understand that aggressive behavior will result in human intervention. The new galactic order was based on a simple principle that every species understood. Humans would tolerate trade, exploration, and peaceful development, but any attempt to harm weaker species would result in swift and devastating retaliation. Admiral Morrison joined the communication from his flagship, where he commanded the human patrol fleets that maintained order throughout former Concordat space. Jake looked more relaxed than he had in years because he no longer had to pretend that genocide was acceptable if it was done politely. We have achieved something interesting, Jake observed. For the first time in galactic history, there are no major wars, no systematic oppression, and no species being harvested for resources. Peace through superior firepower actually works better than peace through compromise. Ryan understood what Jake meant, because the old Concordat had maintained order by allowing strong species to exploit weak ones as long as they followed proper procedures. The new human order maintained peace by ensuring that no species was strong enough to threaten any other. What about resistance movements? Nathan asked because human intelligence continued to monitor former Concordat members for signs of rebellion. There are some groups that want to restore the old system, Ryan admitted, but they cannot recruit supporters because most beings prefer safety to the chaos that would result from challenging human authority. Even the species that hate us admit that life is better under human protection. The irony was not lost on any of them that humans had become the very thing they had once mediated against. The difference was that human rule was based on demonstrated capability rather than arbitrary cruelty. Species that behaved peacefully were left alone, while species that caused trouble were reminded why cooperation was in their best interests. Dr. Elena Rodriguez appeared on a separate channel from her research station, where she continued studying alien societies and behaviors. Elena had become humanity's expert on managing interspecies relations, and her work ensured that the new order would remain stable. I have been analyzing long-term trends in alien psychology, Elena reported. The traumatic shock of discovering human capabilities has created permanent changes in how they view conflict resolution. Most species now instinctively avoid aggressive behavior because they associate it with human retaliation. This was exactly what human planners had hoped to achieve through Operation Nightfall. Instead of conquering the galaxy through military occupation, humans had reprogrammed alien thinking to make large-scale conflict psychologically impossible. President Cross prepared to address the reformed galactic community from the council chamber that had been relocated to Earth. The new arrangement made it clear who was actually in charge while allowing alien species to maintain the illusion of self-governance. Members of the galactic community, Nathan began as representatives from 43 species listened carefully to every word. 1 year ago, humanity discovered that our efforts to promote peace and cooperation had been exploited by species that viewed mercy as weakness and compassion as stupidity. The alien representatives shifted nervously because they all remembered the systematic humiliation their civilizations had experienced when humans finally revealed their true capabilities. None of them wanted to risk triggering another demonstration of human displeasure. We tried compromise, negotiation, and diplomatic solutions for over a century, Nathan continued. We were rewarded with genocide, slavery, and plans for our own eventual harvest. The galaxy chose war when it could have had continued mercy. Nathan paused to let his words settle before delivering the statement that would define interstellar relations for generations to come. Humans are not cruel, but we are no longer merciful. The galaxy will have order, and it will have peace, but it will be human order and human peace enforced by human will. We gave you our best nature, and you chose to see it as weakness. You will never get that chance again. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched human patrol ships moving along the edges of known space. Their mission was not to explore or conquer new territories, but rather to ensure that the lessons learned during Operation Nightfall were never forgotten by the species they now protected. A young officer approached Morrison and asked the question that had been troubling many humans since they abandoned their role as galactic mediators. Admiral, the officer said carefully, do you think humanity will ever again try the path of peace and cooperation? Morrison looked out at the stars and thought about the Zephyrian child whose murder had finally broken humanity's patience with alien cruelty. He thought about the processing facilities where thousands of innocent beings had been tortured while the galaxy pretended not to notice. He thought about the plans to eventually harvest human creativity and emotion like any other resource. We offered them our best nature for over a century, Morrison replied in a voice that carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. They chose to treat it as weakness rather than strength. The galaxy will have peace now, but it will be peace maintained by the knowledge that humans remember everything and forgive nothing. The final lesson of human mercy was that it had always been a choice rather than a limitation. When that choice was revoked, the galaxy learned what humans were really like when they stopped pretending to be something they were not. It was a lesson that would never need to be taught again, because the species that survived it would never forget what happened when mercy ended and war began.